Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to The Winter's Tale, a tale about tales. First of all, of course, we've got a little bit of housekeeping to do with COVID restrictions and regulations, and those of you who've been to a few of these already will be able to recite them with me, probably. First of all, please keep your masks on at all times, unless you're exempt or up at this side of the stage. We have your details for track and trace, and we'll get rid of them after these events. If you hear an alarm, it is a fire, so please do get out of the building. And at the end of the session, helpers will help you to get out of the hall, either to the rainy hall over there or outside. Although, of course, many of you may well want to wait on for the event with Miles Jupp at 5:30. So, we couldn't call our book festival Winter Tales without some reference to Shakespeare's The Winter Tale. And I'm delighted to introduce Professor Judith Buchanan, who's an extremely ably qualified to draw us into that play's mysterious world. Judith is Master of St. Peter's College, Oxford, and a member of the English faculty at the University of Oxford. She's a Shakespearean and a film scholar who works also with the creative industries. She's director of Silence Now, a project bringing works of silent cinema to contemporary audiences. She co-adapted and acted as Shakespeare advisor to the British feature film Macbeth, directed by Kit Monkman in 2018. And provided expert voiceovers for silent cinema DVD releases for the British Film Institute and the Thanhauser Film Corporation. Author of a number of books, including Shakespeare on Film and Shakespeare on Silent Film, she co-founded the York International Shakespeare Festival. And she sits as a government appointment on the Marshall Aid Commemoration Commission. Today, she's going to tease out some of the purposeful and playful narrative layerings within The Winter's Tale as a way of inviting audiences and readers of the play to enjoy this beautiful and painful tale the more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen. It's a great pleasure to be here. And indeed, when I was invited to speak at a festival called Winter Tales, there was only one choice of play that I could reach for at that point. It's a special play for me. I bring in a particular kind of dramatic cargo in bringing Winter's Tale in. I carry it with me in all sorts of ways. There are some cadences about how to navigate a complicated world that feel important to me. If you know the play, I hope that it's a privilege for me to be able to be enjoying some bits of it again with other people who know it too. If you don't yet know the play, I need to tell you that there is no way of talking about the end of The Winter's Tale that doesn't involve spoilers, and that I would much rather you were able to let that narrative unfold in special space, in theatrical space, or in your own quiet reading pleasures, but I will do my best not to trample all over the end in my hobnail boots so that you can still enjoy it in an unfolding way at some later moment. Before we get into specifics in relation to the play, I'd like to locate it in its moment in Shakespeare's writing career. So I can tell you that The Winter's Tale is a late play, but you may well ask, why should we care when it was written? It is its own beautiful self, and can't we just isolate it and let it be that and investigate it as such? Well, I think we should care, because I think knowing how we place it in time can enable us to think about some of its relationships to other things around it, and can illuminate some of its dramatic and poetic particularities the more. So we are going to think about it in terms of where we place it in Shakespeare's writing career. This is the first half of Shakespeare's writing career. We're going to do a really quick scamper through this. Shakespeare was writing from about 1590 to about 1613. Some of these dates I am willing to stand by absolutely, and I could pin them to within a few months even. Some of them are a best scholarly guess, and that there is a debate around the particularity of them. So there may be a little bit of play within a year or two around some of them, but the zone is good enough, a reliable enough zone for us to think about them together. So as we do that, this first half of Shakespeare's writing career, I have highlighted in pink the comedies. So this is a really dense and fertile period in which Shakespeare's imagination about what comic form is and can do is going full gusto, and he's working and reworking ideas about comic impulses and comic structures variously, visiting and revisiting that through from the 1590-ish to about 1601-ish. And then this is the second half of Shakespeare's writing career. And you can see in red there, at the early 17th century, there's a really intense phase of writing some of those big tragedies that we know. So this is a rich phase of writing tragedies. So Shakespeare doesn't ever settle into doing only one thing, but there are periods in his writing career when he is doing more of something than something else, where he is coming back to ideas of structure, tone, pace, endings, and emotion, and indeed language, and how those things work together within different kind of generic exigencies. And then there are these four plays, Pericles, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest. And they are neither comedy nor tragedy. They are drawing on some of the impulses of both. They settle much more in relation to each other than they do in relation to some of those earlier comedies or some of those tragedies from the early 17th century. Early 17th century. We sometimes refer to them as late plays, sometimes as tragicomedies, sometimes as the romances. There's a hybridity of generic influence in them, and they share a sort of narrative pattern and some thematic interests. And they also respond to something that was particular to the King's Men, Shakespeare's playing company. In 1608, they purchased the Blackfriars Theatre. So if you look on screen now, you can see I'm comparing the Globe, which was their playing space from 1599 onwards, with the Blackfriars, which was additional to the Globe from 1608 onwards. So the Globe is an open-air playhouse. It has a capacity of about 1,500, and the basic entry price is a penny. It's very affordable. The Blackfriars is an indoor playing space. It has about half the capacity of the Globe, and its basic entry price is sixpence, so 6 times the basic entry price for the Globe. What does that mean? It means that there's a self-selecting audience who can go there, that only those who had financial capacity could afford the entrance price, and that it was cited amongst the Inns of Court. So typically an audience for plays playing in the indoor Blackfriars would have been people with education. So what does that mean in relation to those plays, so Pericles, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, The Tempest, that come post-1608? It means that Shakespeare can assume a kind of dexterity of catching reference, and that there is a sort of density of investing reference without needing to stop and make sure that it's being glossed. So things can be dropped in quite quickly and move on the assumption that you know that your audience will catch the allusion. Of course, there are a gazillion allusions being dropped in all the plays before that point as well, but there's an understanding about a sort of different sort of exclusivity of audience post-1608. So in the first folio, the 1623 Shakespeare folio, the frontispiece introduces this collected works as comedies, histories, and tragedies. And that when we go to the catalogue page, we see that the play we're going to be concentrating on, which is The Winter's Tale, is listed as a comedy. It is a comedy in that it is in as much as it is steered through to something approximating a happy ending, but it is a difficult comedy because the ending it steers itself through to is fraught with problems and that there is no turning away from or whitewashing the scale or the depth of some of those problems that it's had to deal with. So whereas in the festive comedies in particular in the 1590s, pickles will emerge, misunderstandings will emerge, and they will be happily unscrambled by the end. Pickle doesn't quite capture the depth of the problems that emerges in these late plays. They are deep, they are humanly scarring, and they cannot be banished or dealt with or resolved in any neat ole kind of way at the end, and Shakespeare knows it. So he invites us to look at the scale of the problem and then think about whether it's going to be possible to navigate that story through to something approximating a comic ending, despite the fact that we all understand the degree of human pain that is being dealt with. So they have a lot in common with each other, these plays, and there's a sphere of reference that can be slightly denser than some of the earlier plays. And Shakespeare's also, of course, when he's writing these comedies, he's been through that tragic phase as well, and there is something about a sense of the pain of the world that is also infusing these plays too. So, Winter's Tale it is that we're going to be dealing with. Thinking about what can be salvaged, and I'm particularly interested, as Helen said, in what kind of other narratives Shakespeare uses in order to help him decide what this play is generically and what it isn't generically as well. There's no chirpy ending in prospect, but how does he steer it through to the ending he does? So I would like us now to turn to, you should have a handout in front of you. And we're joining the action in Act 5. So for those of you who don't know this play, let me tell you that Leontes, King of Sicily, King of Sicilia, has managed to blow apart his nice family unit, his lovely family unit of his wife and his son, and his wife was expecting their second child, has been absolutely exploded in the early parts of the play, because he decided that his wife was playing fast and loose, was being unfaithful to him with his best and oldest friend. As a result, his wife has died, his son has died, and his newborn daughter has been sent into exile. And as soon as these tragedies happen to him, he is then plunged into self-accusation as he realizes the dreadful and unfair thing that he has done. 16 years pass, and then by a series of improbable happenstances, the young baby girl who had been sent into exile, who has now grown into young womanhood, reappears in his own court as the betrothed of the son of his old best friend, with whom he suspects that his wife had committed adultery all of those years before. And so there's a very short exchange here. And I wonder, there's a roving mic, I know, somewhere in the room, somebody helpfully holding that for us. I wonder if I might ask for any volunteer who's willing to read this little exchange with me. That's terrific. Thank you very much. What's your name, sir? Richard, that's very kind. I think we could probably license you to take your mask off briefly whilst you do this with us. Would you like to be Paulina or Leontes, Richard? Okay, and if we have a volunteer to play Paulina, that'd be great. Otherwise, I will be Paulina. So Paulina is Leontes' old friend. She speaks the truth. She doesn't soft-soap it. And so the young daughter has recently appeared, and Leontes has met his daughter for the first time. And this is Paulina upbraiding Leontes about the nature of the exchange that they have just had. Are you ready, Richard?
Yep.
Sir, my liege, your eye hath too much youth in it. Not a month 'fore your queen died, she was more worth such gazes than what you look on now.
I've thought of her, even in these looks I made. Oh.
No, so that's the end of that. Thank you. It's a very, very short section, that bit. Thank you so much, Richard. So how is Leontes looking on his daughter? What is Paulina upbraiding him for? Actually, that's a real question, not a rhetorical one. What is she saying to him? Anybody? Yes, there's something a little bit disquieting about the way in which you looked at that young woman, says Paulina. This is something that is not an... If you are looking at this young woman in the way in which you used to look at your lovely wife, then you are looking at this young woman in a way that is deeply troubling. Why does Shakespeare drop it in? Nothing is then made of it. We scamper away from it. It doesn't go any further. This is a reference to Shakespeare's source material. His source material was... Nope, not there. His source material was, it's written onto your handout, was Robert Greene's prose romance, Pandosto, or The Triumph of Time. This is really popular. You can see it's popular by how many times it's reprinted within Shakespeare's lifetime. So it's first produced in 1588, it's reprinted 1592, 1595, 1607, 1609. So it had cultural currency. It was a popular read at the time, and that therefore there would have been people in the audience who would have known that story. What was that story? It was a story that very closely prefigures the Winter's Tale, and Shakespeare draws on it quite precisely, and then he skirts away from it in particular at the end. So it ends with the son of his old friend and the young betrothed his own daughter turning up at his court just in the same way, and then he, who's called Pandosto, not Leontes in the original, in the Green, sexually propositioning the young woman before him. He doesn't know it's his daughter at that point, but that when he then discovers it's his daughter, he is overtaken by guilt, and in a tragical stratagem, says Green, he kills himself, so that there is no magical return to life. There is an incestuous proposition, and then Pandosto dies. So as at the beginning of Act 5, Shakespeare drops in. So if you imagine there's no pre-published synopsis of what's going to happen in this play before you go and see it, either at the Globe or at the Blackfriars. You get, I thought of her even in these looks I made, and Paulina saying, I'm not quite sure you should be looking at this young woman like that. And you know the Green, you go, oh, help. I know where this is going. This is heading towards a tragical stratagem. This is not going to end well. We're at the beginning of Act 5. What kind of a genre of play are we in at this point? There seems to be some equivocation, some irresolution. Is this, in fact, going to be more of an Othello than a Much Ado About Nothing? And, of course, both of those plays deal with a woman who's been wrongly accused of adultery, and one of them takes it in one direction and another takes it in a completely different direction. Is The Winter's Tale going to be more Othello-like or more Much Ado About Nothing-like? Well, in its reference to Green, it seems to be dropping in a clue. Of course, we know, those of us who've got to the end of it, that it skirts away from that and it doesn't do it. And there is a greater sense of relief that it isn't that, by virtue of the fact of having conjured it just briefly into its territory and then moving on without it. Let us move on as well to the next section. So now we're going to look at Paulina's teasing offer to show Leontes a statue of his long-lost wife. So she says, if you can accommodate yourself, you who have had 16 years of dealing with your grief and self-accusation, you who have come to some mode of living in which you can live with the deep grief and the deep pain that you have been accommodating yourself to all of this time, I will show you a statue of your dead wife. And that this next section is dealing with the exchange that Paulina, who is a kind of arch choreographer at this point, is talking him through. Richard, I wonder, would you be happy to stay as Leontes for this?
Sure. Yes.
I'm annoyingly going to keep breaking off. So
Okay.
we're not going to get through. We're going to do your first speech first, and then we're going to have a few more breaks as well. So there's not going to be a completely uninterrupted flow. Okay. But that the statue is unveiled. It's always a kind of theatrical coup, actually. I just wonder whether I can show you a few little bits here. It's an invitation for designers to think about how statue-like they want this on-stage statue to be. You might recognise Judi Dench there as Paulina. We'll just leave those up there, I think, for a moment as we read the scene together. Richard, thank you.
Oh, thus she stood, even with such life of majesty, warm life, as now it coldly stands when first I wooed her. I am ashamed. Does not the stone rebuke me for being more stone than it? O royal peace, there's magic in thy majesty, which has my evils conjured to remembrance, and from thy admiring daughter took the spirits, standing like stone with thee.
Thank you, it was lovely. So Leontes prompts us, as he looks at the stone statue to his wife, he prompts us to think about what stone is and what flesh is, materially and emotionally. Back in Act 1, part of his outrage at what he believed he was seeing was that his wife was whispering nothing, he says to himself. At another point, he talks about her paddling of palms and pinching of fingers and horsing foot on foot as he imagines he is seeing his wife doing with his best friend. So he's expressed his horror at his wife in terms of her speech, whispering, and her actions, horsing foot on foot. So it's in this sort of apparent act of stony memorializing. In some ways, that statue expresses the deathly silence and the stillness that Leontes' jealousy has implicitly wished upon his wife in the early stages of the play. So the Shakespearean statue kind of gives form in really unforgiving terms to the deferred outworking of a sort of misogynist desire to not let her speak and to not let her move. He accused her of being slippery, and now, of course, she is in a form which epitomizes fixity. So part of what Hermione represents, the Hermione statue represents, is an embodied accusation back to Leontes about the very fate that his own condemnatory misreading of his wife earlier in the play has implicitly wished upon her. And he reads the stone as rebuke, although the only terms in which he can, at this point, articulate what that rebuke is that he feels that he is more stone than it is. That does not the stone rebuke me for being more stone than it. Let us read on. Indeed, my lord, if I had thought the sight of my poor image would thus have wrought you, for the stone is mine, I'd not have showed it.
Do not draw the curtain.
No longer shall you gaze on it, lest your fancy may think anon it moves.
Let be, let be. Would I were dead, but that methinks already, what was he that did make it? See, my lord, would you not deem it breathed, and that those veins did verily bear blood? The fixture of her eye has motion in it, as we are mocked with art.
I'll draw the curtain. My lord's almost so far transported that he'll think anon it lives.
Oh, sweet Paulina, make me to think so 20 years together. No settled senses of the world can match the pleasure of that madness. Let it alone.
I am sorry, sir. I have thus far stirred you, but I could afflict you further.
Do, Paulina, for this affliction has a taste as sweet as any cordial comfort. Still, methinks, there is an air comes from her. What fine chisel could ever yet cut breath? Let no man mock me, for I will kiss her.
Good my lord, forbear. The ruddiness upon her lip is wet. You'll mar it if you kiss it. Stain your own with oily painting. Shall I draw the curtain?
No, not these 20 years.
Okay, we're going to stop there for a moment. So this is elaborate dance of, shall I show you this thing? No, perhaps I won't show you this thing. Shall I draw the curtain? Do you want to step back? Would you like to see it? It could afflict you further if I let you see it. Perhaps you're not really ready to see it. I'm not sure that you're in the right state of mind to see it. But perhaps you'd like, there's this sort of, shouldn't we, kind of exotic dance going on of the enticing thing that is then repeatedly withdrawn. The first thing I want to say is, We're looking at verse here, that the whole play is not in verse, but that some of the most formal moments of it are in verse, and that often it's which kind of characters speak in verse and which speak in prose. A Shakespearean verse, as you know, is structured around iambic pentameter, so this is a 10-syllable line with a dum 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 beat to it. If you look at how one character gives to the next each time, the transitions between Paulina and Leontes, if you were writing this yourself in iambic pentameter and you wanted it to be somebody doing something to somebody else, you would have her finishing her own iambic pentametric lines, so that and then he delivers with as it were, a contained response that is entire unto itself. That almost never happens in this exchange. It's much more dialogic, so she leaves a half line and he picks it up and finishes the line. There's something about the speed of pickup that's required in order that iambic pentameter can hold, but there's also something about collaboration, about him being invited into the conversation. Why might that be? In the first 3 acts of The Winter's Tale, Leontes is kind of unyielding in emotion, relentless in action, and he's pushing the narrative towards the stuff of tragedy. His obduracy makes it look like we're in Othello, that this is going to be pushing in the same kind of direction, a tragic, unbending figure who has wrongfully accused his wife of infidelity. Thereafter, however, the female characters in The Winter's Tale conspire to divert the male-inspired tragic impulses here and to rescue the play and the characters in it from unrelenting despair. But Leontes is more than just a passive recipient of the gift of this generic shift. He is himself required to participate in its delivery. He has to choose it. It would have been perhaps a more comfortable position for him to have settled back into the grief he has accommodated himself to than to dare to feel more. He doesn't know what might ensue. In giving Leontes the option of declining the intricate, life-changing invitation to see more, this thing that she has choreographed of unknown dimensions and character as yet, Paulina also thereby invites him to assume some elected agency in the outworking of what that then ensues. And so there is another little half story that is not happening here, which is the story in which the curtain is closed, he quits presently the chapel, and there is no further drama at this point. But the drama is being chosen, and he is choosing to expose himself potentially to more hurt, and that the play rewards him for being willing to feel. Let us read on. Perdita, so long could I stand by a looker on, either forbear, quit presently the chapel, or resolve you for more amazement. If you can behold it, I'll make the statue move indeed, descend and take you by the hand. But then you'll think, which I protest against, I am assisted by wicked powers.
What you can make her do, I am content to look on. What to speak, I am content to hear. For 'tis as easy to make her speak as move.
It is required. You do awake your faith. Then all stand still. On, those that think it is unlawful business I am about, let them depart.
Proceed, no foot shall stir.
Music, awake her. Strike. 'Tis time. Descend. Be stone no more. Approach. Strike all that look upon with marvel. Come, I'll fill your grave up. Stir, nay, come away. Bequeath to death your numbness, for from him dear life redeems you. You perceive, she stirs. Start not. Her actions shall be holy as you hear my spell is lawful. Do not shun her until you see her die again, for then you kill her double. Nay, present your hand. When she was young, you wooed her. Now in age, is she become the suitor?
Oh, she's warm. If this be magic, let it be an art lawful as eating.
Thank you. So we're going to now stop there for a moment and think about, so that the narrative patternings that are being echoed here. So in the lines that we've just looked at, start not, her actions shall be holy as you hear my spell is lawful. There are a curious couple of lines there. And the next two lines are what we're going to dwell on for a moment. Do not shun her until you see her die again, for then you kill her double. So what is Paulina saying? What is her dying again? What sort of death is Paulina referring to there? Real question. Her natural end-of-life death, right? So do not shun her until she dies properly, for real, at the end of your life. Attend to her until that point, because if you do otherwise, you will kill her double. These are curious phrases, and that they are phrases which an educated audience would have recognised, and indeed, perhaps you do too. But I'm going to talk you through them just in case you haven't done. So, in Ovid's Metamorphoses, Book 10, we hear the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus, as you know, also loses his wife not once, but twice. She dies once of a snake bite, and her grieving husband, Orpheus, then goes down to the underworld to plead for her life. It's an unusual move, but he fancies his chances, and that he does that because he is a very fine harp player, and he's a pretty good poet too. And he's going to use everything he has at his disposal with his articulacy and his musicianship and indeed his devotion to his wife in order to charm the gods, and they are charmed. The Furies weep, and even the stony heart of Pluto is moved, and a deal is struck with Orpheus that Eurydice can be restored to Orpheus, but on terms. And the terms are very particular, and they are not very concessionary. And that they are these, that he can lead her back out of the underworld, back to his own world, but he cannot ever, on that journey back out of the underworld, turn once to look upon her. If he turns to look at her at any stage on that journey, she will be lost again. So he has to prove his love for his wife by, in effect, feigning neglect of her. So he starts leading her out to the and he can't tell her that that's the deal. He starts leading her out of the underworld, but when they are nearly back to his own world, she calls out to him from behind, and Orpheus, hearing his wife's call, loses his discipline and turns to gaze upon his wife, and in fulfillment of the contract that has been made with the gods of the underworld, she slips back immediately to the underworld, dying a second time. So, dying a second time, iterum moriens is the phrase that Ovid uses about her second death. And Orpheus is plunged into deep grief by, and Ovid gives us the double death of his wife, Gemina nece conjugis, the twin death, the double death of his wife. So what does Paulina give us? Paulina gives us, do not shun her until you see her die again, for then you kill her double. So there is this lightweight evocation of the husband who loses his wife a second time, the double death, the double death. So Orpheus is conjured, Eurydice is conjured, and what do we do with that? The Shakespearean phrases echo it closely enough for it to be a sort of shadow memory within this, but it's also being unstitched. The Ovidian story is invoked by Shakespeare less as a pattern than as a foil. Eurydice being claimed back by death through a Gemina nece, through a twin death, is narratively cruel. The mistake that causes it, a husband's concern for the welfare of his wife, should have been commended, not punished. And Shakespeare sees the pitilessness of the Ovidian story, and he conjures it, as indeed he does Green, in order to subvert it, and in some manner even to speak back to it with a newly charged humanity. Whereas, therefore, Orpheus is instructed specifically to, in effect, shun his wife, to look away from her, never to look back even if she calls out to him, as a savagely conceived test of his devotion. Paulina's brief to Leontes about how to prevent his wife dying a second death is equally specific. Do not shun her. So the Shakespearean instruction to keep his spousal eye firmly on his wife is in fact consciously anti-Ovidian, an undoing of the harshness of the source tale. And the rewritten dynamic of Orpheus's story in Shakespeare perhaps even exposes something in the original tale that craves gentler treatment. Gluck, of course, also responded by redeeming Orpheo et Eurydice with a more compassionate ending as well. So the restoration of Hermione, and she is indeed restored at the end of the Winter's Tale as she steps down from the plinth, emerges as the more miraculous and the more affecting for being legibly a revisionist response to Eurydice's story, but now radically underpinned by compassion. And so the spectres of these alternative endings are held in a sort of state of poised, conscious acknowledgement at the end of the Winter's Tale. We understand the complicated hybrid thing it is, partly by reference to other stories around it which are infusing it and are embedded within it in order to be referenced and rejected, so we can understand the temptation to draw things in other directions towards a less concessionary ending, and the will, the craving to take them to a place that is more narratively and more emotionally concessionary. Richard, let's finish. Polixenes. Can someone be Polixenes for me? And thank you. You've got one line. Take it. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Camillo. Camillo, you have 2 lines. Camillo, please. You're back on. You've got Camillo as well.
She hangs about his neck. If she pertains to life, let her speak too.
Oh, you've got 2 more as Polixenes. Keep going. Thank you.
Aye, and make manifest where she has lived, or how stolen from the dead.
That she is living, were it but told you, should be hooted at like an old tale. But it appears she lives, though yet she speak not. Mark a little while. Please you to interpose, fair madam. Kneel and pray your mother's blessing. Turn, good lady, our perdita is found. And now, could we have Caster Hermione? Somebody be willing to read Hermione? Thank you so much. Could we pass the microphone? Thank you.
You gods, look down and from your sacred vials pour your graces upon my daughter's head. Tell me, mine own, where hast thou been preserved? Where lived? How found thy father's court? For thou shalt hear that I, knowing by Paulina that the oracle gave hope that was in being, have preserved myself to see the issue.
There's time enough for that, lest they desire upon this push to trouble your joys with like relation. Go together, you precious winners all. Your exultation partake to everyone. I, an old turtle, will wing me to some withered bough, and there my mate, that's never to be found again, lament till I am lost.
Oh, peace, Paulina. Thou shouldest a husband take by my consent, as I by thine a wife. Let's from this place. What? Look upon my brother, both your pardons, that ere I put between your holy looks my ill suspicion. This is your son-in-law, and son unto the king, who, heaven's directing, is troth-plight to your daughter. Good Paulina, lead us from hence, where we may leisurely each one demand an answer to his part performed in this wide gap of time since first we were dissevered. Hastily lead away.
Thank you, readers all. That was lovely and good to be doing it together as well in its special spine-tingling character. There is a sort of joke about comic endings at the end there. So Paulina, who has indeed lost her life partner some acts ago, and Antigonus went off and that got chased off stage by a bear with that famous stage direction, and that she goes, oh well, you can all be happy, I suppose, you've all been, but alas me, I'll just, don't mind me, don't let me put a dampener on anything, I'll just crawl over here into a corner and tend my wounds. To which Leontes replies, well, let me just have a look around the stage here. Look, there's a bloke over here who doesn't seem to have any... I tell you what, how about you and Camilla? That would make a tidier ending, wouldn't it? This is how the early festive comedies end, come one more, two of each kind makes up four. This is how Midsummer Night's Dream, there can be all kinds of pickles, but everybody needs to sort of be holding hands with somebody by the time you get to the end, so you can call it a comic ending. And there's a sort of too easy reference to how comedies can come to rest in that moment of Paulina and Camilla, which has not been prepared for in any way up to this point. But also the rest of the ending is really pulling against that. We've got 16 years of pain. We've got Hermione apparently being restored to Leontes. What does she say to Leontes? She doesn't say anything to Leontes. When I asked a group of students once, what might she have said? They said, you bastard. What can she say at that point? She lost her son. Her son is dead for real. He is not restored at the end. She lost 16 years of her daughter. She lost her marriage. Who knows what's been happening in that 16 years gap of time? What can you say at that point? But the play chooses to believe that despite the fracture lines, despite the pain, that something else might yet be possible by virtue of dramatic human intervention. And that I love this group of plays because in their broad cadences, they are able to look at scars and wrong and hurt and human pain, and that they do not make light of that, and they don't say that reconciliations are easy, and they don't tie it all up with a ribbon in a way that suggests sort of facile resolution. But they do say, does life have to be a tragedy? Does this have to be Othello? Do we have to push it to a point of brittle non-return? No, let's try and find something that might enable us to navigate back towards something that feels real and human. And the last words are, lead us from hence where we may leisurely each one demand an answer to his part performed in this. There's a lot of talking still to do. This is not game over. But a mother and a daughter have been restored to each other. An old friend has been restored to an old friend, despite the fact that outrages of a really awful sort were committed, and that these characters are trying to find their way back to something that can believe in the hope of a different kind of future, and that the generic indeterminacy of it is the world that I think we all live in. Thanks very much. Do you want me to take 3 minutes of questions? It's up to Jolyon.
I've just been told we've got a little bit of time for questions, if anybody would like to ask Judith anything. Any questions? Or you could also just come up here and ask her yourself at the end if you don't want to ask anything just now. Anything? Well, maybe we should just finish things then for now. And Judith, thank you so much for highlighting all those different layers in the play and getting us to think about, the resonances, the classical references, even the theatre space, the costumes and that sort of statuesque look. I've really, really enjoyed it. To use your own word, spine-chilling in those interactions. I could have listened for twice as long, and if it's not going to lower the tone, I know what I'm going to be doing when I get back home, getting onto Netflix and looking to see if I can see a version of the Winter Tales to have a watch and try and see all of those things that you've been highlighting to us. So I want to thank you. I think we should also thank Richard and our other readers. You didn't know you were coming here to act, did you? Judith has also very kindly brought some books. They're not going to be in the Rainey Hall bookshop. They are just here. This is the bookshop chair. So if you want to have a look, come up here and you can negotiate directly with Judith. I think there's only one copy of each. So anyway, have a look at that, and do please stay on for our next event, which is comedian Miles Jupp, comedian and, of course, more importantly than that, alumnus of New College, and he'll be in conversation with Harriet Harris, the university chaplain. So do stay for that at 5:30. But can you join with me once more and thank Judith Buchanan?